Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking time out to join us for today's webinar. My name is Shalonda S.B. Johnson, and I'm the Director of Operations at Ethnographic Research, Inc. Today's presentation, Ethnography Through the Looking Glass, Deep Consumer Insights Right Now, will be presented by Melinda Rea-Holloway. She will be sharing some ethnographic methods for keeping up with deep consumer insights during COVID-19, including the value of an ethnographic approach now, the importance of culture, the importance of induction, and applying ethnography and its values to remote research. A few things before she gets started. We'll be running a live question and answer session. Melinda will stop periodically during the presentation to answer questions, and then we'll also have time for questions at the end. So if you have questions, please enter them into the open questions area located just under the presentation window. And if you miss anything, don't worry. We'll be sending you a link to access the on-demand recording when it's available. Now, a little bit about our presenter. Melinda is the president and CEO of Ethnographic Research, Inc., which is based in Kansas City. She has spent years pioneering ethnographic field and analysis methods for business consumption. Her research experiences have taken her around the world and have included work in retail, healthcare, and food, and others. Melinda holds an MA in sociology and a PhD in community psychology. So without further ado, I'll turn the time over to you, Melinda.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming to our webinar. This is our first ever Ethnographic Research Incorporated webinar. So we're learning and hopefully it'll go smoothly. I do envision this more as a conversation than a formal presentation. And so I'll be going over some things that I think are important to keep in mind about doing deep research right now, but I'm also interested to hear the kinds of thoughts that you all have and any questions that you have. And as Shalonda said, you can ask those questions at any time. And so I'll be answering questions as we go along, and then at the end, we'll have time to do that as well. One of the things that I wanted to talk about is really the importance of doing really deep research right now. And I think a lot of people are hesitant to do research right now. And I think that they're afraid of things not being normal and afraid of really digging into research and spending resources to try to understand what's going on when things are so out of whack. But one of the things that we're pretty convinced of is that, during this time of really massive cultural change, where daily routines are different now than they used to be, and things like communication and information consumption has changed drastically, relationships, entertainment, all of those things, the way that we work has changed a lot. And I think this is a time to really dig in and try to understand what's going on, because it's my personal opinion that we're probably not going back to our old normal anytime soon, or maybe ever. And so I think it's really important to try to understand what's happening with people right now. And I want to start by apologizing for my background. I am in a hotel room and I had to travel unexpectedly. So I apologize that that's the backdrop that I have today. So just try to ignore that. But wanted to start with, let's see if I can, yeah, there we go. Telling you a little bit about our company and our experience and what we've been doing the last 20 years. We're a group of sociologists, and there are 4 of us that have been together the whole 20 years. We incorporated in March of 2001. And we had a little center at the University of Missouri in Kansas City for about 5 years before that. And we are academically trained ethnographers. And that word ethnography kind of gets thrown around to mean a lot of different things, especially in the corporate world. But we are traditionalists when it comes to ethnography. And we do projects on all different types of content areas. And so we spend time doing field work in people's homes, in retail spaces, in workspaces, in hospitals, in clinics, really anywhere that you can think of. And we also work all over the world. And so our work is pretty diverse. And here's a list of some of the companies that we work for, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have about some of the projects that we've done. But I really want to start the webinar by talking a little bit about how do you take an ethnographic approach even during a pandemic. And admittedly, it's a little bit more difficult now for us to be ethnographers than it was a year ago. But ethnography and ethnographic techniques especially can be applied anytime, anywhere. And so I want to talk a little bit about how you go about doing that. And I think to start, it's important to point out that ethnography is really more an approach to understanding than a specific methodology. And so what that means is that there are methods that hang with ethnography. So like participant observation and going out and being amongst people and, getting into people's homes and looking through the refrigerator and looking through their cabinets. That's a methodology that hangs with ethnography. And most ethnographers do use that method. But ethnography is really bigger than that. And it's really a way of looking at the world and a way of approaching information collection and organization of data and all those things together. And so you can still use ethnographic techniques even if you can't be doing participant observation. And during the pandemic, we have continued to do ethnography, and we've continued to use video diaries to help us to get close to people and to understand what they're doing. We've done some online interviews with people, and we've used an inductive approach to that so that we can still, uncover things inductively, even if we're not doing participant observation. And so I think that one of the things about ethnography that we really need to remember right now is that it is an extremely flexible approach. And so ethnographers are trained to be prepared for anything and to work around it and to make sure that we're collecting data in a way that allows us to conform, to our situation, to conform to our participants' lives, and to do a good job of being able to still collect data even in difficult situations and circumstances. And so I think that's something to really remember right now and to keep in mind. Are there any questions yet? And you can also type questions directly into the chat box. Okay, I'm sorry, I did that too quickly. I think what's important for ethnographers is to collect data in a way that gets you as close to real life as possible, and then also to make sure that you're being pretty rigorous in the way that you're collecting data and also the way that you're doing analysis. And you can still take an ethnographic approach to doing those things, even if you're not doing participant observation. The second thing I want to talk about is why it's still important to get close while still social distancing. I think the value of being in context, even when you can't be there physically, cannot be overstated. And so I think right now there may be a little bit of a push to think that because we may not be able to go into people's homes ourselves, that we still can't get close to the action. And I think that ethnographers are always interested in finding new ways to really get into people's lives and to really understand what's going on with them. And so I think that we are still of the opinion that you can do home tours. You can have people show you how they do things. You can show them real life. I mean, you could ask them to show you real life, even if you're not there in person. But you do have to set it up correctly. And so I don't think that it's good enough to hand someone a camera and say, show us what you're doing, or give us a tour of your home, or those kinds of things, without a lot of pre-work and instruction about what exactly it is that we're interested in. And the place that we always start, whether we're doing in-home or in-person interviews or we're doing video diaries, is that we ask people to keep in mind that we know that they are the expert. And so we spend a lot of time, really preparing people who are going to keep video diaries for us, or who are going to invite us into their home or into their workplace. And we tell them a lot about what it is that we're trying to accomplish. And so we don't ever do covert research. We are always really transparent with people about what it is that we're doing and what we're trying to accomplish. And I think spending some time explaining that to people and explaining to them that we really do see them as the expert allows us to get a lot deeper into real life. We also spend some time giving people some guidance about, the kinds of things that we might be interested in, but we also tell them that we're interested in anything that will provide context for us and that will allow us to, understand a little bit better about what real life is like. And I think that right now you can still do participant-driven or ethnographic interviewing. And what that means is that you're spending more time listening. You're really not doing formal interviews. You're really letting your participant guide you and tell you what you're supposed to be talking about and tell you the direction that you should be focusing. And then the last thing on this page that I want to talk about is just the value of real life, especially when things are in flux. And so right now, I think that we're missing the opportunity to really get in there and understand these shifting habits and rituals and routines and the value of mundane life. A lot of our work over the last 20 years has really been spent paying attention to what people are doing in their everyday lives. And sometimes it's not that exciting. And so we're sort of experts on, how people do morning routines, how people do evening routines, how people do hygiene, how people cook dinner, those kinds of things. And in the work that we've done since the pandemic began, we've sort of noticed that there's a lot of change in that. There's a lot of change in even the time that people are getting up and going to bed. There's a lot of change in the way that people are feeding themselves. There's a lot of change in the way that people are doing chores, and just everyday activities are really in flux. And I think there's a lot of value in paying attention to that and really digging in and trying to understand those everyday life things, so that we can understand what that means in terms of what's happening in the larger culture, and also how, cultural shift is happening. Any questions so far? Well, we have one question in the chat, and it looks like Angela says, there's so much value in the mundane. How do you convince participants that the mundane is valuable? I hear from participants, oh, I'm not interested. Or my life is boring. I'm not interesting, or my life is boring. I'm sure you wouldn't want to interview me. Is there a way to frame the reality that the mundane is interesting? Yes, that's a very good question. And we hear that a lot as well. I think it's important that you do spend the time, letting people know what it is that you're doing and why you're doing it. And I think the way that I always frame it with people is, this is going to sound really strange. But I'm a sociologist, and I've been hired to understand this thing. And I know it's totally strange, but in order to really understand this thing, I have to get into real life, and I have to understand how it happens for real people. And so it really helps me to be able to see you doing daily life and see how this thing fits into your life, because I know that your life is a lot bigger than this thing that I'm trying to understand. And this can be the case if it's something like how to live with a chronic health condition, or it's the case in trying to understand how people use their computers or how people watch TV. The context of people's lives is a lot bigger than that. And I think that when we explain that to people, and we explain to them that we know that it sounds totally strange, but that we are, sociologists, and our life is really about the way that people do everyday life. And then our clients hire us to help them to understand how their product fits into that life. Then I think that helps people to understand why we need to not only know how they're using their computers or how they watch TV, but that we need to know the bigger context of their life in order to understand how that behavior fits into that life. And I also always tell people, you would be surprised at what we find interesting, because we literally have watched people load and unload their dishwashers for months. So we've had people keep video diaries, loading and unloading their dishwashers. And you really can't get much more mundane than that. But we find it interesting. And we also find that it's not always the same from day to day. And so we also try to explain that to people. The reason why we need them to keep a video diary for a month of them loading and unloading their dishwasher is because there is variation in that. And a lot of that variation people cannot even think to explain to you, because they don't even know that it's happening. And so I think those kinds of things right now are fairly easy to continue to do, and to continue to try to understand what is happening with everyday life with people. It's a very good question.
Question from Joelle. She says, have you found that virtual ethnography has allowed you to connect with a broader audience than you may have pre-COVID? Any silver linings, any new methods you want to continue even when people can interact in person again?
Yeah, so I'm going to be really honest with you on this. We were traditionalists, and we really did, participant observation. We were there in person, for almost every project that we've done in the last 20 years. We did start using video diaries more than 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago. And that has become a regular part of our toolkit. And so we were doing those pre-COVID. We were doing video diaries and participant observation in-person interviews. But a couple of years ago, we had a client who asked us to start doing some online interviews instead of going into people's homes and instead of doing those. And we were really resistant. And we pushed back and said, oh, you just really can't replace the value of being there in person. Shalonda, could you mute yourself? You can't replace the value of being there in person.
Yeah, and I do.
You can't replace the value of being able to smell and, see and just the frame that you're allowed when you're there in person versus, on that computer screen when you're doing an online interview. And so we really resisted, but our client really wanted us to try it. And so we did. And we were sort of pleasantly surprised at how much information that we could get in online interviews in combination with video diaries. And so we sort of have changed our mind about that a little bit. And I think particularly right now, when I still think it's possible to do participant observation right now in particular situations, you have to just do a cost benefit analysis. I think right now it would be so awesome if someone was hiring ethnographers to help, everybody understand how to do COVID testing and how to, kind of integrate that into systems. I think that ethnographers could help a lot with something like that. And they might have to go in person and kind of make some observations in order to be able to do that really effectively. And so I think every individual ethnographer and every individual, client who's considering ethnography and every individual participant that we might visit and spend time with would have to do a cost benefit analysis to decide whether or not the value is worth the risk around that. But to answer your question, I think, video diaries, they were already in our toolkit, and we've been using those for a long time, and definitely we'll keep those post-COVID. And I think online interviews can be really useful for some things. And I think that's something that we had struggled with before trying it a couple of years ago, was we were always kind of thinking that they wouldn't be good enough or they wouldn't be as good. And I think it really depends on what the question is. And I think if the question can be appropriately matched with those online interviews, you may not need to do participant observation every time. And I especially think that if those online interviews can be paired with video diaries, they can be really useful for people. And I'd say that we probably will continue doing those post-COVID as well. Okay, so I think we have another question before we move on. How can you convince the baby boomer and silent generation communities to let us gain insight into their lives virtually? I'm working as an anthropologist interviewing seniors within underserved cultures where there is an issue of trust, attempting to understand aging. What methods can I use to maintain social distancing and trust while still using the anthropological toolkit? I think that that's a very good question. Thank you. I think that this is something that we face sometimes with multiple different types of populations. And so some populations are easier to gain trust with than others. And it also depends on who the ethnographer is and whether you're kind of an insider or an outsider, to that group to begin with. And so I think that we always start from a point of assuming that we have the job to try to convince people and try to reassure people, because it's not just about gaining access to them, but even after you've gained access, it's about whether or not they trust you to allow you into their lives fully and to share information with you and to give you the real scoop about what's going on. And so sometimes I think that takes longer and sometimes that happens more quickly. But I really do believe that it really starts with making sure that you're very clear about what your objectives are and you're very clear about the methodology that you're going to use. And I found that almost everyone, and I've been doing this a very long time, and I've had to get into lots and lots of different people's homes and workplaces. And I found that almost everyone, if you are genuine in telling them that, I'm here to learn from you and you're the expert, and the only way that I can really do that is to get into real life and to understand what that's like for you, and I'm here really to learn from you, then that goes a long way in getting people to the point where they allow you into their lives. But then the other thing is that you have to mean that, and then you have to follow up behaving that way. And so when you show up, you really have to be there to listen, and you have to spend a lot more time listening than asking questions. And you have to be genuine in letting people know, because I think they're really good at knowing if you're not. And so I think, laying the framework with that in the beginning, and then also following up once you get there in person, and looking at your participant as the expert goes a long way in that. And I'm not sure if your question was about technology too, but because it may be harder for boomers or people who are older to do like online interviews and those sort of things. And we just work with people. And so when we send out our video cameras for our video diaries, some people struggle more than others. And sometimes that has to do with age, and sometimes it has nothing to do with age at all. But we spend a lot of time, Shalonda spends a lot of time on the phone with people. And sometimes she FaceTimes people, or she finds a way to be able to see what they're struggling with and help them with that technology so that we get them set up. And then the other thing is, we're never looking for professional quality, video. And so sometimes when people do video diaries for us, they're not showing us exactly what we want to see, or, they may be cutting off half their face or whatever. And it's more important to us that we're actually, kind of there in that moment with them than that we've got, professional quality video. And so we're pretty not concerned about that most of the time. Okay. Any other questions, Shalonda, that you have? Okay. Okay, so the other thing I think that we need to remember, as ethnographers or anyone who's taking kind of an ethnographic approach, is that we still have to be concerned about things like sampling. We have to still think about who do we need to talk to and where do we need to go in order to understand this thing that's happening. And so we're going to continue to do that, whether we're doing in-person, visits, or we're doing online visits, or we're doing video diaries. But the thing that I think we always forget about is that we need to sample context as well as sampling people. And so I think that as we're in this pandemic, we have to think about that maybe a little bit differently. And so, I've had, some of my potential clients say to me, well, people aren't going anywhere. They're not doing anything. So really the context is, really just inside their home. That's what's happening right now. But the funny thing is that even just inside your home, things are different, on different days. Things are different in different rooms. We have spaces in our homes that are front stage spaces and spaces that are backstage spaces. So even if it's true, and it's not really true that people are all staying home, but even if it were true that we were just doing ethnography within someone's home, we could spend hours and hours and hours and hours and never uncover all the context inside someone's home to really get a sense of what's going on there. And then also things are different depending on what time of day, you're there. So if you show up on Tuesday afternoon, it's really different probably than Monday morning when people are, getting going for the week, or Saturday evening. So it's really important to spend some time thinking about, what are the potential contexts that we need to make sure that we sample for. And you can, sample for those contexts when you're doing video diaries, or you can sample for those contexts, when you're doing online interviews. Sometimes we do online interviews with people who, are totally wiped out. I did one actually just a couple of days ago where it was pretty late at night. It was probably, 8:30 or 9 o'clock at night. And my participant had just finished work and he was totally stressed out. He was late to our appointment because work ran late. And as we were talking, I saw that he was nodding off, during our conversation. He was totally wiped out. He was exhausted. So the time that you talk to people can really impact the experience and can really impact what's going on with them. So even during, kind of social distancing and doing ethnography kind of remotely, I think we have to remember to consider those things, and we have to remember to continue to sample for variety in people, but also in variety in contexts as well. Okay, so we have another question here. This is from Helena, and she says, if it's okay, I will share my experience from this past month. I interviewed people over the age of 60 remotely using Zoom, and I just made sure to let them know that I would be there on the phone to help them set it up if they needed it. We made it fun and joked about each other during the process. They all had a smartphone and, due to quarantine, somewhat familiar with the Zoom concept through Bible studies, etc. Of course, in addition to what Melinda said, that they know how the information will eventually help their community. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
Exact same thing as far as, spending quite a bit of time letting them know that I'll be available for them whenever they need it and just to reach out.
Yeah. And I think that we can continue, even if we're doing remote methods, we can continue to be there at a time when the thing that we're interested in is happening. And I found, really over time that people are pretty open to show you almost anything. They really are. If you've done a good job of explaining to them, why you're doing this and why you need to see it, then people are pretty good about, showing you things, especially in today's day and age. I think that people can set up their cameras and they can show you, or set up their phones and they can show you, while they're cooking dinner, they can show you, while they're putting the kids to bed, they can show you almost any routine that they're doing. And I think it's really important for us to continue to try to see those things, even if we can't be there in person to see them. I think we need to really push ourselves and, push our group of fellow ethnographers to continue to find ways to get close to people and be there in that moment of action. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about the importance of understanding our evolving culture, and especially right now. As I said, things are really in flux right now, and our cultural norms are really shifting. And the thing that we know about culture is that people cannot explain it to you. And so people can do a better or worse job of explaining, kind of the cultural context of their lives. But as a rule, people aren't very good at being able to tell you what the culture is that they're participating in. And so I think that because it's so invisible, and because a lot of times it's deemed unimportant by most people, I think it's incumbent upon ethnographers to really be able to insist that we're still paying attention to that. And I think that right now is a time to be documenting this cultural shift and not be waiting it out, and not be waiting till we get to the other side of it to kind of figure out what's going on with people. As I said, we've been doing video diaries during this pandemic. And so we have seen that the way that people are, doing entertainment has vastly changed. And that has ripple effects into the way that people are doing other things. The way that people are consuming information has drastically changed. And again, that has ripple effects into other things. The way that people are doing communication has, drastically changed. And so I think it's important for us as ethnographers right now to be documenting that and to be thinking about what that means. And how that's going to impact systems, how that's going to impact the way that people are doing daily life, the way that people are doing other things. So I think that it's really important right now for us to focus on culture. And I think that's important because not only is it going to tell us what people are doing, because we kind of see that, we kind of see what people are doing, but we want to understand the why behind it. And we want to understand that by looking at the cultural context. And I think that most ethnographers know this, but sometimes the same cultural norm looks slightly different in different households and in different workplaces. And so it's really important for us as ethnographers to be observing enough different contexts in order to be able to see the patterns and to be able to understand and define what those cultural norms are. And so I think right now we see a lot of changes in material culture and what's going on with people around the things in their lives, and that's evolving a lot. And so in the work that we've been doing, we've seen people using new products. We've seen people reverting back to old products that they hadn't used for a while. And so I think there's a lot of shift around that, a lot of shift in the way that people are thinking about things and the way that people are using things. And so we want to try to understand, what's being used, why it's being used, where it's being used, how things are being used. And I do think that this is something that we can't really fully do with just online interviews. I do think that we have to use video diaries if we can't be there in person, because there's just really no way to gain that sort of insight over an online interview by itself, I think. We're also really paying attention to innovations and hacks right now, because people are having to, maybe work at home when they don't have the space to do that, or they've never done that before, or they have to do it in the context of other people being around. And they have to share space in a way that they haven't. So we're seeing a lot of innovation, a lot of hacks right now, and we want to understand those a little bit more. And then the other thing is, again, people can't accurately describe to you how they use things, especially things that they do routinely. Several years ago, we did a study on oral care where we watched people brush and spit and gargle in 6 countries. And what was really interesting was that no one could really tell us accurately how they did oral care, even though everyone does it every day, sometimes multiple times a day. But nobody could really tell us about that, and they couldn't accurately describe their routines. And I think that's because that so much of what we do every day is just invisible to us, and that we don't pay attention to it. Any other questions right now? Okay, Sarah has a question.
Yeah.
Are you using the term video diary to mean recording them doing things? I ask this because I've typically thought of video diaries as like someone talking into the camera about their day or about their practice, but without an interviewer. Yeah, so we get all kinds of video diaries back. And so we try really hard to give some general guidance and general guidelines around, what we're looking for, but we let people make it their own. And so they often do become confessionals. And in fact, a lot of people tell us as we get towards the end of a project, they'll say, gosh, I'm really going to miss that. I'm really going to miss the opportunity to, talk to the camera, because it's been kind of like therapy for me to kind of decompress at the end of the day and kind of tell you about what happened in my day or tell you what I was struggling with and those kinds of things. And so often our video diaries do include that, but almost always we ask people to show us specific things. And so it depends on the project that we're doing. And like I mentioned, the dishwasher project that we did, sometimes it's, how do you watch TV? Sometimes it's, show us when you're in pain. Sometimes it's, show us how you struggle, to get things, out of your cabinets or, those kinds of things. So we're always asking specific questions about things that we want people to show us, in addition to answering questions that we have on the video diaries. And again, our video diaries always include, a request to show us around their homes and show us a little bit about their routines. And so especially if we're not going to go visit in person, we always ask our participants, show us a little bit about your morning routine, your evening routine, your afternoon routine, so that our video diaries come back as a combination of those things. And again, every participant makes them their own. And so they can look quite different from one another. We have participants who are calling Shalonda every couple of days requesting another memory card because they, are just filling up those memory cards so fast. And then we have other participants that we have to nudge a little bit in order to get them to fill up a memory card. So they vary quite a bit, but we have standard things that we ask for, and then we give participants a lot of latitude in what they decide to do with that. Okay, so Erica asks, what if you're trying to better understand small business sellers and customer interactions, for example, and you want to capture these interactions via video? How do you ethically do this? Okay, so I think the first thing, if I understand your question correctly, is we have to get permission from everyone. And so I think that it's hard to videotape something that you can't get permission from both parties. If it's more than one person, I think that's your question. Are you concerned about the people on the other end of the video? Yeah, okay. Yeah, so I think that we have to get permission from all parties. And so, again, we've been sort of surprised at how easy this is to accomplish. I think that if people understand what you're trying to do, most people will say yes. I mean, we do a lot of work in healthcare. And so we have spent a lot of time in doctors' offices and hospitals and clinics, doing participant observation and following people around. And one time I observed a doctor doing colonoscopies, and he knew we were coming, and we had permission from him, and we had permission from the facility and everything, but his patients weren't informed ahead of time. And so that meant that morning, as each patient came in, I had to go in and explain what I was doing and ask if I could come in and videotape their colonoscopy. And I was pretty convinced that most of them were going to say no, because who wants somebody to tell you as you're walking into your colonoscopy that you're going to potentially be videotaped. And so I thought people would say no. And I think almost everyone that day said yes, that we could do that. And so I think that it's really about spending the time to explain things to people and allow, especially if there's a benefit, and it may not be a direct benefit to them, but if there's a benefit where you're going to, come up with a better way to do colonoscopies, or you're going to come up with a better product at the end that will benefit other people. I found that people are really open to that. And we rarely have people tell us no when we ask if we can observe, particularly if you've already got the other party's consent and they're willing to help you explain what you're doing, and they're willing to sign off on it, and you can say that to this third party when you're approaching them. I think that goes a long way in helping to kind of make them comfortable. Shalonda, did you have another question?
About to read the one that you did.
Yeah, sorry. And so I mentioned that we're really interested in material culture, but we're also really interested in normative culture. And I think right now, paying attention to things like ideas and values and beliefs are really important. They are evolving right now pretty rapidly. And so I think that as ethnographers, really trying to understand that is really important in this moment in time. So trying to pay attention to how people think about things, how they feel about things, how they understand this new reality that they're in. We always use this theory of the social construction of reality to help us to frame our understanding of what we see out in the field. And we're using that. We continue to use that right now as we start to, gather data during COVID to understand how people are framing their new reality and how they're creating this new understanding of what daily life is like. And I think for a lot of people right now, it is very confusing. And I think that it's very open-ended. And so that makes people anxious and uneasy. But we have seen, we've been watching people in video diaries, since the beginning of COVID. And I think in the beginning, it was a lot more scary, than it is now. And I think now people are kind of, falling into a groove with it. And I think understanding kind of what that groove is and understanding where people are going with their daily lives and what their plans are and how they see their future is really important right now. And then, oh, go ahead. Sure.
I did want to circle back because I did miss a question from Alan. He wanted to know, how did you know that the respondents couldn't tell you how they do oral care?
Yeah, because we watched them do it, and we asked them about it, and it didn't match up. And so their explanations didn't match what we actually saw. And it wasn't that they were grossly off, but they just weren't able to recall the details or the correct sequencing, that they did things, so that they weren't as accurate as we were when we were watching them. Hi, Alan. Good question. And then, the last thing I want to say on this slide is just that, we're always interested in how normative culture intersects with material culture. And this is always really important to our clients because they're usually about material culture. Most of our clients are. They design products, occasionally services, but lots of times products. And so understanding kind of how that, the way that people are thinking about things, the ideas and values that they have, and how that intersects with the things that they use is really important in our work. And sort of the last kind of section here is just the rising importance of taking an inductive approach to changing landscape. And so, as I mentioned before, ethnographers are always inductive. And so no matter what specific methods we're using to collect data or to organize data, we're always taking an inductive approach. And if you ever took that research methods class, you remember that induction and deduction occurs on a wheel. And so if you're taking a deductive approach, that means that you have a hypothesis and you collect data, you do research and you collect data to see if you're right or not, to try to verify that hypothesis or just actually disprove that hypothesis. If you're taking an inductive approach, that means that you don't have a hypothesis. You're not starting with your answers running. You're starting without a theory, and you go out and you collect data and you try to understand how that data helps you to develop a theory or an understanding of what's happening. And so for us, whether we're doing participant observation, whether we're doing video diaries, whether we're doing online interviewing, whether we're doing contextual mapping, which I haven't really talked much about yet, but we are always inductive, and we start every project assuming that we don't know the answer to the questions that we're asking. We assume that we don't know very much about this context, even if we do. And we start with a fresh set of eyes and a fresh set of ears. And that's really important. And I think that's really important, especially now, because there's a lot of stuff that we've taken for granted, and we've taken for granted in terms of all the things that I've talked about so far. So we've taken for granted around, daily routines, the way that people do that. And we've been doing ethnography for a long time, like I said, and we have a pretty good understanding and database in our head of how that happens in most houses. And so when we go into a home, usually pretty quickly we can tell whether what's going on there in terms of kind of daily routines and rituals are, kind of in the normal range, within that bell curve, or are outside the normal range. And right now, I think that we would be really confused if we made those assumptions that daily life was going on as normal, because I don't know about you guys, but I've been in situations where I've been on Zoom calls or been in a situation where I've been, seeing someone that I haven't seen for a while, or that, a professional situation or a personal situation, that people are looking different now. On Zoom calls, people are showing up looking differently than they used to for meetings. And so I think that we have to start from a step back and assume that maybe we don't know anymore, what is normal routine or what is acceptable norms around a lot of things, because I think those are shifting. And so I think rather than making assumptions and then trying to figure out, why your assumption's wrong, I think that taking an inductive approach and really starting assuming that you don't know what's going on, with people and their daily routines and rituals and their habits and all that stuff, professional norms. I think stepping back and taking an inductive approach around that will allow us to learn a lot that we probably wouldn't if we weren't inductive. And so as ethnographers, we're really spending a lot of time, trying to make those careful observations and do that careful analysis. And again, we can still do all of that right now, even if we can't do participant observation. We can remember that everything is potentially data. And, we can, remind ourselves to expand our scope beyond what we think is relevant, and make sure that we're collecting data that is contextual as well as targeted to the specific question that we have. And then I think we can also continue to kind of move back and forth between learning moments and testing moments. And so I think as ethnographers, we're always doing that. We're starting every project assuming that we don't know anything. I always tell people when I start an ethnographic project, it feels a little bit like being dropped in the middle of Times Square. It's sensory overload. There's so much to see and hear and smell and pay attention to that it's kind of hard sometimes to know where you're supposed to pay attention. And I think that we have to continue to do that. I think that's harder to do like online interviews, because I think when you're in someone's home or in their workplace, you just necessarily have to adapt to what's going on, and you're not able to focus in a way that on online interviews, I think there's a sort of a compulsion to get to it and to ask the questions that you have and to not spend the time just kind of sitting and being uncomfortable, in real life. And so I think as ethnographers, we have to find ways to do that. We have to find ways to transfer that to some of our online interviewing. I'm wondering if any of you have any thoughts about that. No thoughts? Okay, I think we do. Oh, go ahead, Shalonda. I think we do have another question, though, don't we? I see a question from Alan. He said, I get a little nervous of what I'd miss by not being in person. Yes, you and me both, Alan. I still think that there's no replacement for in-person ethnography. I think that being there, in that moment of action and really being able to smell it and being able to move from space to space with people, being able to point things out that you see that people might not volunteer, to you, and you're not able to see, online. I think that there is a trade-off to that for sure. And I will be very happy when we can go back to doing that. I do think that maybe there are some questions right now that are so important that, again, you do that cost benefit analysis and all parties, decide it's worth it to go ahead and do some in-person ethnography. And I'm certainly open to that on my end. But, like I said, every party involved would have to be open to that. But I think that the thing that I would like to communicate is that I think we can use a lot of the tools in our toolkits, and I think we can use a lot of the things that we know as ethnographers and apply them to these new methodologies, like online interviewing and video diaries, and we can just really work harder to be inductive. We can work harder to pay attention to culture. We can work harder to be good ethnographers in the way that we're asking questions and in the ways that we're encouraging people to show us things, even if we can't be there in person or if we're there virtually. I think we need to really challenge those online interviews to be less about interviewing and be more about sharing and showing. And I find myself doing online interviews kind of having to resist the urge to fall into being a traditional interviewer. So I have my list of questions, and it's, on online interviews, it's so much easier to revert back to those questions. When I'm doing in-person fieldwork, I never take the field guide with me. And so even if I wanted to, I couldn't pull that out and start asking the questions that I have. I have to be in the moment, and I have to really follow my participants' lead. And I just have to, trust that as an ethnographer, it's going to work out. So I think that as ethnographers, we have to be pretty judicious in bringing what we know about what it means to be good ethnographers into the new methodologies that we're using. Shalonda, do we have any other questions?
We've covered all the questions we have for now. Was there anything else you wanted to cover before we wrap up?
Oh, yes. No, I'm not ready to wrap up. But
oh, sorry.
No, that's okay. We have one more question. I'm a professor of qualitative research methods working with multiple students who are wary of the dwindling options for good academic jobs the next couple of years. What advice do you have for students with traditional academic training who want to consider a career in using their ethnographic skills in the professional setting like ethnographic research? That's a great question. And I'd like to say that, first of all, I didn't believe that there would be options for me as an ethnographer. So when I always tell people that I was the kid who was always staring, and my mom was always saying, "Stop staring, you embarrass me." And now I'm the kind of mom that my kids are always saying, "Stop staring, you embarrass me." But I was born, I think, a sociologist, and I didn't find out until I was in high school that that's what it was called. I took a sociology class, and I was like, "That's what I want to do." And then I discovered ethnography, and I thought, that is exactly what I want to do. But nobody's ever going to pay me to do that. And I remember having this thought process very clearly. And so I decided I would go ahead and be a sociologist, but that I would probably have to assume that I would teach and that I would work in academia. And I was good with that. And I thought, I can do research as an academic. And that was what my plan was. And then as I was, getting my PhD, I started doing some work for corporations and found out that people would pay me to do ethnography. And so I think that as sociologists, as ethnographers, I think that we have to keep an open mind and broaden our horizons. And You may not open up the help wanted pages and see a lot of ads for ethnographers, although I will say right now there are actually a lot of ads for ethnographers doing user research. And so I think that there's a lot of potential there. But even beyond that, I think as ethnographers, we can present ourselves in a way that lets companies know how we can help them. And I think that the skill set of ethnographers is applicable to lots of different things. I mean, we work in mostly new product development and marketing, communication, in those kind of areas. But I think that the skills of an ethnographer are applicable to lots and lots of different things, probably more things than I even know.
Hey, Melinda, AC says, AC says, I never get tired of listening to you. Don't ever stop staring, talking, or listening. So she says she's looking forward to your guest speaking to her graduate students. You're so engaging. Agreed.
Thank you. Thank you, AC.
Yes, she also says she's found ethnography to be really helpful to nonprofit organizations to improve their programming and services.
Yes, that's Angela. Hi, Angela. Thank you very much. So I think we have another question. I don't think I answered this question from Joelle. Have you found that virtual ethnography has allowed you to connect with a broader audience than you may have pre-COVID? Oh yeah, I think we did talk about that. Okay. And then the last thing that I just wanted to say here is that it's really important that we maintain this strong commitment to remembering who the expert is. And I think that is especially important right now. I think it's really important that we all remember that, and that we continue to find ways to be more inductive in our work, and to make sure that we're not, cutting corners in the way that we want to approach things just because we don't have the option of going and doing in-person field work. And I'm happy to answer any other questions that you have. So please don't be shy. Gashia, I hope I pronounced that right, says, a few of us are applied anthropologists and are or have worked in various industries. The opportunities are out there, especially now. Selling your brand is important. Yeah, I agree. I think it's really important to be able to articulate why what we do is important, because a lot of times I found that our potential clients hadn't thought about ethnography, or they hadn't thought about the ways that they could use ethnography, and just being able to explain that to them and being able to tell them how you can be useful in their industry, I think is really important. Any other questions? Well, I guess I'll just wrap up by saying that I think right now it's especially important to try to understand what we don't already know. And so I think that using ethnographic techniques is a really good way to do that. And so I'm happy to talk to you about that if you have questions, or if you think of something after the webinar and you want to talk about it, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Our contact information is here on the slide. So thank you all for attending, and thank you for giving me your time today. Have a great day, everyone.